Let's speak now to Jeremy Hunt, who served as the UK's Foreign Secretary during that first Trump administration. Thanks very much for being with us. And I just wonder, first of all, how you think a Labour government should deal with Donald Trump.
Good morning, Mark. Congratulations on doing the night shift. I mean, this is obviously a challenge for a Labour government because they aren't ideological soulmates with the Trump administration. But they know our national interest is to work very closely with America. Indeed, when I was Foreign Secretary under Theresa May, I met Trump on many occasions. There were lots of things we disagreed with, but we actually found that the security relationship meant that we were, more often than not, we were singing off the same hymn sheet, and we had a very close working relationship. And I think that what will probably happen is that, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, they both won't naturally think the other one is the person they'd like to spend a lot of time with. But the need to talk Turkey on security matters is going to mean that, whatever the initial hesitation, in the end, we develop that close working relationship that nearly always happens between presidents and prime ministers.
Yeah, what about the politics of all this? It seems to be reform that has the ear of the president, that reform that seems to be in the inner sanctum. Reform is at all the parties. Nigel Farage is there. How worrying is that for the Tory party?
Well, I think that, Donald Trump likes people who share his views, his worldview. And I think he'll find when it comes to international issues, he has a lot in common with the Conservative viewpoint. He may well have something in common with the Reform viewpoint. But just going back to your earlier point, Mark, I think the one kind of exception, if you're Keir Starmer, is that Donald Trump is notoriously unpredictable. And if you do one or two things that really infuriate him, then that can tarnish the relationship forever. And that's what I think people like Justin Trudeau found working with him in the previous Trump administration. So I think things like the Chagos Islands are quite an important thing for us to get right as a country. It wasn't a good idea to do it in the first place. This could become something for a president who is obsessed with China and what China's doing in the world. Something like that could be a very dangerous thing to proceed with. So I think it's a very sensible move of Keir Starmer to put that deal on hold until he's had a chance to talk it through with a new administration.
Yeah, my point on reform was really that, when it comes to the next election, you could have Donald Trump and his people supporting the Reform Party rather than the Tories.
Well, the next election is a very long way away. And indeed, it's possible that if Keir Starmer runs to the end of his term, Donald Trump won't actually be president at the time of the next general election. So I think we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The Conservative Party is in a big process of renewal. We have to rebuild our trust, having been so comprehensively beaten. I think when Trump sees the new Conservative Party, he will see that we want to do many of the things that he wants to do in the United States. Not all of them. We won't be the same. There are many issues where we will differ. But there'll be a lot of areas where he can see common ground.
Right. Well, let's see where Trump's policies and your ideas as a senior Tory align or not. Do you agree with this mass deportation of illegal immigrants he's about to embark on?
Well, let's see. The old saying that people campaign in poetry and govern in prose. Let's see what he actually does. But what he is responding to is widespread concern, not just in America, but in the UK and across Europe, about open borders. And we have got to tackle that in the UK. He's tackling it in the US. I think we have to wait and see what he actually does. But I also think we have to recognise this is an issue which governments, including the government which I was a part, did not handle as well as we could have. So making sure that governments control who comes into their countries, that is for most voters, one of the most important things that a government has to do. And he is responding to that in the United States, and we'll have to do the same here in the UK.
Right, I just want to ask you about Gaza in a moment, but just two other issues on Trump. What if he pulls out of the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, again, as many expect him to do? Would you be aghast at that?
Well, I think that would be very disappointing, but I don't think it would be a very big surprise. After all, that's what he did last time. I think what we saw last time was that it's quite possible for the world to carry on making progress on climate change, even if the United States is not part of it. And I think it's really interesting. Things, too, have changed inside the United States. There's a lot of solar farms going up in Texas because actually renewable energy is very cheap now. The prices have come right down. So I hope that doesn't happen. It won't be a surprise. I think the big question that we all need to think very hard about is American commitment to NATO. And there, I think we're going to have a very straightforward choice. Are we or are we not prepared to increase spending on defence? I think from Trump's point of view, if we are prepared to increase spending on defence across Europe to the American levels, he said 5% of GDP. America's spending about 3.2, 3.3% of GDP. If we're prepared to increase it...
Do you think it would be 5%?
Well, I don't think...
Should the UK go to 5%?
Well, I think that's his opening gambit, but the US themselves are on about 3.2%. Right. So I think if Europe matches that, then he will recommit to NATO and indeed lead NATO in the way that we all want. But that is a very big decision for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves.
And very briefly, on his appointment as a health secretary, Robert Kennedy Jr., a man who perpetuates myths about vaccines. Very quick thought on that?
Well, I don't agree with what Robert Kennedy has said about vaccines. But again, let's see what actually happens in practice. I think there are going to be lots of things on a domestic level where we may not agree with what the Trump administration does. But I think the most important thing for the world is that Donald Trump is a strong president. And a safe world needs a strong America. And that's why I think even Trump's biggest critics recognize that something very important is happening today, which is America has once again got a strong leader.
Right, and just finally on Gaza, do you think that is a ceasefire that can last? There are two more phases. They are talking about that. Do you think Israel is serious about a permanent end to that war?
I think that Netanyahu is. Of course, it's not easy for him to carry all his domestic constituencies. But what I think is interesting here is that he didn't really pay much attention to what Joe Biden wanted or thought. I don't think he particularly respected Joe Biden. He does care about what Trump thinks. And those two, although they're in some ways quite similar temperamentally, also have occasionally quite a tense relationship. So I think what we will see is a lot more American influence over Israel, and Trump wants peace.
OK, Jeremy Hunt, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the programme this morning. Thank you.